Hello, everybody. I want to share with you a tale of, well, interest and intrigue. But really, I'm going to talk to you about the rise of heliocentrism and how we moved away from a geocentric model to a heliocentric model. And in the meantime, we'll have a little bit of storytelling about two of astronomy and history's most interesting people. That is an opinion, not a fact, but hopefully you'll find the story pretty interesting. Let's start with what we're up against. So Aristotelian philosophy, the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, slowly became sort of codified into the entire fabric of most of the Western world's existence, down to the very fabric of how they thought and what they possibly could think. Once you get inside of a dogma, it's almost impossible to see out of it. So this is going to be one of the biggest hurdles to overcome, because that Ptolemaic model, that geocentric model, that was the running model of the solar system because it gave the best predictions and it adhered to Aristotelian thought. To move past that, from a geocentric model to a heliocentric model, people had to let go of these hard thought beliefs baked into Aristotelian philosophy. And of course, Aristotelian philosophy is much, much bigger than what I'm going to talk about. I just want to talk to you about some of the principles that relate to astronomy. And really, these get codified when Ptolemy builds his model, his geocentric model, with this deference and epicycles, which you can see pictured on the left of the slide. So these become absolute things that must be accounted for. And Aristotelian principles dictated that there must be perfection of the heavens, that things outside of the earthly realm are perfect. This is like Plato's realm of forms, except codified into a perfection of the heavens. What does this mean for the Ptolemaic model? Well, it means that all the celestial bodies that are not Earth must be perfect. So they must be round objects, and they must follow perfect circles, which meant that the deference had to be perfect circles, and the epicycles had to be perfect circles. It was only below the heavenly realm, the earthly realm, so that would be, the moon would be part of the heavenly realm, and everything below the moon would be the earthly realm, our atmosphere and the earth itself. That is where imperfection is allowed. Another Aristotelian principle that was baked into the Ptolemaic model that needs to be overcome, well, some of it doesn't need to be overcome, but so Aristotle realized that the earth was round. This was not some new discovery that people made only a few hundred years ago. The Greeks knew that the earth was round. Eratosthenes estimated the diameter of the earth with remarkable accuracy over 2,000 years ago. So in a Ptolemaic model, where we are adhering to Aristotelian thought, Earth is round, but it's also fixed. It does not move. It sits still. It is the center of the universe, and the planets and all the stars revolve around the Earth. So Aristotelian thought demands a geocentric model, and it demands that all orbits must be perfectly circular. These were the hard things to overcome, and breaking down Aristotelian thought, the Aristotelian dogma, to show that nature is not behaving that way by actually observing it, is going to be the story that allows us to really adopt and go into a heliocentric view of our solar system, and eventually the view of the universe that we have now, where the Earth has no special place within it. We are just one star amongst hundreds of billions in our galaxy, which is amongst trillions of galaxies in the universe. So part of the problem is not with Aristotle himself and Ptolemy and how they were thinking. It's the fact that as these ideas progressed through the centuries, they became intertwined and baked into the concepts of what existence is. It became the natural philosophy. It was intertwined with the politics and the religion of the day. It became such a confined box that it was almost impossible to think outside of it. And it was, in fact, heretical to think outside of the box. And this is not a lesson of, oh, they're so dumb, we're so smart. One of the things that we often should do, and probably do more often, is sit back and reflect upon what possible dogmatic principles we still carry right now in our modern age, that we still carry that limit our scientific endeavors. They are there. It's just these things are almost impossible to see because we're within the box of them. Okay, so we had the Ptolemaic model, which had been running for over 1400 years, very, very successfully, predicting the positions of the planets. And you have to remember that people were ardent astrologists at this point, where they actually thought the positions of the planets, things that are happening in the heavens, have an effect on humans in the earthly realm. So it is hard to start moving past that sort of an idea. So we have to come to Copernicus to really start shaking things up. And he's not going to put forth a radically new idea. He's going to put forth a radical idea that is actually quite old. So Copernicus, Nicholas Copernicus, was not very satisfied with how complicated the Ptolemaic model was, this geocentric model. He was also read up on his Greek philosophy and his Greek natural science philosophers, and he knew of this idea proposed by Aristarchus of a heliocentric universe rather than a geocentric universe, which was proposed 100 years before Ptolemy put his Ptolemaic geocentric model together. So he was really, really excited about this, and he built himself a heliocentric model, which we call the Copernican model, that became sort of the seed that broke down and allowed us to realize that the Earth is not the center of everything, which really opened up the universe to us. However, his Copernican model, his sun-centered model, was not perfect. And he was still a victim of the Aristotelian principles, Aristotelian thought, and still demanded that orbits must be perfectly circular. But his idea, it gets out there, it becomes a seed, it excites lots of brilliant minds, but it's also generally rejected for being heretical, and ideas took a while to take off, so it was really sort of sat there as a published book in a library. There's no printing presses or things like that yet. So, what is the Copernican model? I introduced this in the previous video. Here we have the sun at the center, and then we're just going to put all of the known planets, the naked eye visible planets, orbiting around the sun, and they'll put them, it's still in the same order that we have now. Closest to the sun, you have Mercury, then you have Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Uranus and Neptune hadn't been discovered yet, so these were the planets of the solar system. So we have the planets of the solar system, but all of their orbits are perfectly circular. The sun is at the center. All the orbits are perfectly circular, but he does do something radical, and he allows the moon to orbit the Earth. So the moon orbits the Earth, the planets orbit the sun, and the farther you are away from the sun, the slower you orbit. However, still believing that there must be a perfection in the heavens, he forced these orbits to be circular, which led to it having lower predictive power than the Ptolemaic model, which made him go revisit his original Copernican model. And guess what he ended up doing? For every one of the orbits, he would put a little epicycle on the orbits. So he revisited the idea of epicycles. What was really, really intriguing about this model, however, was that it very simply and naturally explained retrograde motion. It was a simple, much simpler than Ptolemaic model, and it naturally gave us retrograde motion. So Copernicus puts forward this heliocentric model. It's out into the world. It's going to take a while. It has to steep to become an idea that people start running away with. And this is where we're going to enter a very strange tale of two very eccentric people that are connected with one another. So enter the players of this strange tale, and this is going to be more of a story time video than anything else from here on out, where there is important information, but you can get that from the slides and the textbook. Here we have the two different people that were working together. We have Tycho Brahe and Johannas Kepler. And yes, this is going to be a trail that has murder, we don't know if there was a murder, and if there was a murder, who the murderer are. There are several murdering suspects. There might be some infidelity. Might be some assassins. There might be inspirations, not for literally for a Shakespearean tragedy. Tycho Brahe might be the inspiration for Hamlet. And there's going to be theft, and of course, there's lots of intrigue. So let me tell you a little bit about both of these people. We have Tycho Brahe. He was the Danish royal astronomer. In fact, he controlled 10% of the wealth of Denmark while he was alive and had his own private observatory. That is a lot of the wealth. He was in the confidences of the royalty of the time, which may have been part of his undoing. He was also the best observer of the day. This is prior to telescopes, so he's not using telescopes, but he had invented his own observational equipment where he could observe the planetary positions, the positions of planets and the stars, with up to a better than or at about an arc minute accuracy. That is incredibly good accuracy for the non-telescopic era. Tycho Brahe was a geocentrist, though. He had a geocentric model. He was trying to advance and push the Ptolemaic model and advance it. And he was a very, very, very eccentric character. It's kind of hard to see on this picture, but if you've ever heard of Tycho Brahe, you probably know that he had lost his nose. He had a fake nose. How did he lose his nose? Well, he was in a class learning mathematics. He got into an argument with a fellow student about a mathematical principle. So, like normal people, they had a duel over the mathematics, and Brahe, in that duel, had his nose cut off with a sword. However, he is not only an astronomer, he is an important figure in the entire Danish royal government. So he can't just walk around without a nose. He has to have a false nose made. And he actually had several false noses made. You usually hear that he had a gold and a silver nose. Those are for special occasions. He also probably just had a regular old copper nose that he wore around most of the time. So yes, he would wear a fake nose. And I said he was an eccentric character. That is not doing this enough justice. As a important person for all of Denmark, he also had political responsibilities, but he didn't really like his political responsibilities. He liked to party instead. He also liked to collect weird animals from all around the world, so he ended up with a moose at one point. He would usually spend his time partying. He wouldn't go on his diplomatic missions and like go to the courts of other people. He would send sometimes his moose in his place, so he could stay at home and do what he wanted, his observations and his partying. And then one time, got really, really drunk, fell down the stairs, died, not Brahe, the moose on a diplomatic mission. He also had a jester named Jep that was thought to be clairvoyant. He was an odd character, a very, very odd character. Most likely the inspiration for Hamlet as well. So Shakespeare knew of Tycho Brahe and one of his rivals, one of the people that was proposing more of a heliocentric model in an infinite universe that inspired Giordano Bruno, who you maybe have heard of. So Shakespeare knew of both of those. He was friends with Digges, who had an alternate idea of how the solar system, the universe was structured than Tycho Brahe. And Tycho Brahe, being close to the royal family, may have had an affair with the Queen of Denmark and fathered the prince, but that's not certain or known. But it's going to come back, and it might be why he was murdered, if he was murdered. So it might relate to his death. As you can see, this guy is like wrapped up in all sorts of things. And all of this gossip that was going around, all these rumors, whether true or not, Shakespeare knew about them. And they got baked into Shakespeare. How does Shakespeare start? All is not well in Denmark. It's the story of Denmark. Other hallmarks that Shakespeare might be Hamlet might be based off Brahe. The characters Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are literal cousins of Tycho Brahe. Slightly different spellings of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but that's their names. So, oh, and then there's a king that's coming to haunt Hamlet, who And why might there be a king that's haunting Hamlet? Because Tycho Brahe might have been having an affair with the queen. So all sorts of really interesting things associated with Tycho Brahe. Take some time, look him up. He also had an assistant. That's Johannas Kepler, who was a brilliant mathematician. In fact, Tycho Brahe was advocating for him to become the imperial mathematician, the court mathematician. Kepler, however, was not a geocentrist, he was a heliocentrist, but a little bit of a kooky one. He was trying to show that Platonic solids and a divine geometry existed amongst the planets as a proof of Christianity. So also his own eccentric character, who was a little bit quieter, very jealous, is documented several times talking about wanting to do violence unto Brahe and having rage fights with him. So he would have fits of rage where he would yell at Brahe. He is also going to be a suspect in the possible murder of Tycho Brahe. So how does Tycho Brahe die? So the story that goes, and this is now evidence is showing that this is probably not true, that there was a dinner that was held for the royalty that at Tycho Brahe's place. And there is a rule that at a feast, a dinner, one of these celebrations, you are not allowed to get up to use the bathroom before any of the royalty gets up. So as long as they're still sitting and having their meal and enjoying the festivities, you got to just sit there. Tycho Brahe, being a fan of the drink, obviously had too much to drink, had to relieve himself, but couldn't, and therefore caused bladder damage that led to his death about 2 weeks later. That was the idea, although there's not a whole, it's probably more evidence that he had a kidney problem. But then again, they investigated some of his hairs as little as 10 years ago, they've exhumed his corpse since then, and they found out that Tycho Brahe also shows signs of a massive amount of mercury being introduced to his bloodstream just 24 hours prior to him dying. So he might have been assassinated by mercury poisoning. And there are suspects in the mercury poisoning. Kepler very much wanted full access to Tycho Brahe's data, planetary data set. Brahe was closely guarding his observations, would only give Kepler a limited amount of data in hopes that Kepler would focus on that data which would prove Brahe's idea of the universe to be true. It would not give him, say, access to the planetary positions on Mars, which he closely guarded and Kepler very, 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 very strongly wanted. So maybe Kepler did some mercury poisoning to get access to the data. Maybe because also at the feast was the current king of Denmark, the son of the queen that Brahe might have had an affair with, who clearly did not like Brahe. So maybe he hired one of Brahe's relatives who was down on his luck and out of money to poison and kill Brahe. All of these are running ideas. None of them are, there's no one that is like, yep, that's definitely how Brahe died. But there is a lot going on with all of this. What does remain through all of this is Brahe dies in his late 50s. Kepler knows that Brahe would have willed all of his planetary positions, all the data he needs to show his heliocentric model to be right. He knows that Brahe would have willed that to Brahe's family. So while Brahe's corpse is pretty much still warm, Kepler sneaks in and absconds with all the data. He steals the data. So if there is ever a time to use astronomers to create a movie, the movie should be about this, my personal opinion. Okay, let me actually tell you a little bit more about that. Let's see, have I covered everything? Assassins, yes. Infidelity, yes. Murder, yes. Shakespeare, yes. Theft, yes. Definitely intrigue, yes. Okay, I hit all those. So why are these important to our story of rise of heliocentrism? And this is where you maybe want to start taking notes again. So in the rise of heliocentrism, how we're going to start accepting a Copernican model and move past it, but still have a heliocentric model, really depends on getting data that can show that the real solar system has the sun in the center, not the Earth. So what we need is a great observer with a great data set of planetary positions and star positions. Enter Tycho Brahe. I don't have you memorize dates or anything like that, so don't worry about memorizing any of the dates. But he had collected the world's most precise planetary positions for a long periods of time, running years to decades of data. And his data was accurate with 1 arc minute precision, which was unheard of. But even with 1 arc minute precision, he was unable to measure stellar parallax, the apparent shift of the stars as the Earth would be orbiting around the sun. So this supported his idea that it was a geocentric universe. So Brahe is our data collector. He gets us our empirical evidence, our planetary positions that are going to allow a mathematical solution to be made that will show that heliocentrism is the correct model. What we need is the brilliant mathematical mind to take that data, to use that data, regardless of how it was acquired, and do some amazing mathematics on it to come up with a heliocentric model that has better predictive power than the Ptolemaic model. And it allows for predictions that the Ptolemaic model cannot account for. Well, it has predictions to observations that the Ptolemaic model just cannot account for. So eventually Kepler ends up with Brahe's data. It was a struggle for him because he was trying to prove some perfect geometry of the heavens and the solar system, which forced him to go through a whole different slew of ideas before, in frustration, he sort of gave up. He had tried every possible shape for orbits you could imagine. He even invented new shapes, new mathematical shapes to try to explain the planetary data. And in frustration at the end, he's like, fine, what happens if I let go of this idea that orbits must be perfect circles? What if I make them slightly flawed circles, circles that are squished a little bit, ellipses? So he tries elliptical shapes of orbits, and boom, he comes up with a mathematical model that explains the observational data of Tycho Brahe. He builds a new model of the solar system using mathematics, where the orbits are not circular, but elliptical. This is what we need to really start building a heliocentric model that represents the reality that we live in. So this was a long and winding video. I hope you enjoyed learning about these eccentric characters of Kepler and Brahe. They are certainly some of my favorite characters in history. And I will see you next week in the next batch of videos.